Well, good morning or good evening, everyone, whichever part of the world you're in. This is Colin Geddes recording our second GTG podcast. And today we've got with us Sarah Lavender Smith. She's calling in from Telluride in Colorado in the US. Sarah is a GTG alumni. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Colin. It's so good to see you again.
It's great to see you too, Sarah, after all this time being apart because of the pandemic. Let me give you a little bit about Sarah's background before I hand over to her, and she can tell you much more detail about what her own background is. Sarah is a 53-year-old woman and mother of two, and she has actually done G2G 3 times in the past. So she's a very experienced self-supported stage racer. She was third in our inaugural race in 2012. She was the second female in 2014. And in our last edition in 2019, she was actually the ladies champion. In addition to that, Sarah also participated and was third female at the Mauna to Mauna marathon that we arrange in Hawaii in 2017. So without any further ado, Sarah, let me just hand it over to you, and why don't you give us a little bit of a feel for your own background?
Great, thank you, Colin. So hello, everybody. I'm so excited to talk about the Grand to Grand. I love this race. It basically changed my life 10 years ago. You know, I was a fairly experienced ultra runner. As Colin mentioned, I'm 53. I started running more than half my life ago in my 20s as a graduate student. And I did road racing and marathoning for about a decade. And then in the early 2000s, I switched to trail and ultra running. And, you know, I have a fairly stout resume of ultras. I've done a lot of 100-milers and other challenges. But back in 2012, I had not yet run a 100-mile. But my main profession is as a writer, and I have a background in journalism. And I wrote regularly for Trail Runner magazine. And so in the spring of 2012, my editor contacted me and said, hey, there's this new event happening in Arizona and Utah, modeled after Marathon des Sables. Have you ever wanted to do a self-supported stage race? And I said, what's that? I had no idea. And so I know a lot of people who sign up for the G2G give themselves like a year of preparation and a year of getting excited. And so for me, it came completely unexpectedly out of the blue. And I look back on it thinking like my editor probably gave me this assignment because he wanted some story of like a fish out of water and a story of failure, because he thought I'd struggle. And I thought I'd struggle too. So I just, you know, in a matter of just about 3 months, I got myself as educated about Marathon des Sables and other self-supported races and figured out like, how am I going to survive in the desert? And I got out to Kanab, which I love this little town in the Grand Circle of national parks. And long story short, I did not fail. I kind of found myself. I actually did really well. I love the format of combining, you know, a race every day with, you know, and being out off the grid on your own during the day, and then you get to camp and you recover. And I just found my groove, and you know, in spite of some mishaps and an inauspicious beginning, I did really well. And then I went back in 2014 and 2019. So that's how I got into G2G. But outside of that, as I mentioned, I'm an ultra runner, and I'm also a running coach. And so in addition to doing the G2G, I've trained several clients to successfully finish the Grand to Grand, as well as other self-supported stage races. So I really love this niche of the sport. And yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And
Great.
that's
Okay,
it in a nutshell.
great. Well, tell us rewind a little bit more about your background, because you said you're a writer. You obviously love, now you've got the passion, and it comes out very clearly about trail running and ultra marathon running. But there must have been a tipping point at some point where you were just doing short distances on roads. What made you, and at what point in your life? Because I tend to find, from looking at our cross section of runners, it's a more mature sport. That, you know, the sweet spot for people signing up to GTG tends to be sort of 35 to 60 age group. So at what point in your running career did you make that switch into trail running and longer distances?
So it happened in my late 30s and early 40s. And I mean, I just fell in love with the trails. I think, you know, I find road marathoning very so stressful and performance oriented, where you're working so hard to shave a couple minutes or even seconds off your time. You know, I had spent a decade working to get my marathon times closer and closer to 3 hours. And for a variety of reasons, I discovered trail running and ultra running in the Bay Area of California. And I really became closer to that community. And I love the endurance aspect of it. And the Grand to Grand just takes that to another level. And one thing I'm a planner, and I love strategy and logistics. And I love the mental aspect of it. And so one of the things to know about a challenge like the Grand to Grand is the person who is the most physically fit, fastest runner is not necessarily going to win the event. In fact, he or she may actually blow up and not do that well because they're so performance and speed oriented. And there's so many factors that go into success at a self-supported race other than physical fitness and raw performance. It's so much about your mental game and your logistical preparation and what I call systems management, of taking care of yourself along the way. And so if you're a good planner and you're a smart runner and you're a really smart, steady tortoise, and you have the endurance mindset, then you can really excel. And so that's, I just found that I was good at it, and I love the journey on the trails and in ultras, especially longer distance ones, you know, 100K, 100 miles, that there's something about the challenge of just, you know, this simplicity of only worrying about getting from point A to point B as efficiently as you can. That's really, you know, in our complicated lives, when we're dealing with so many things in a given day, to be able to let go of your regular life and just hit the trail and have your only concern be to get from point A to point B as well as you can. It's, to me, it's like, you know, some women like going a retreat at a spa or something. For me, a day on the trail, that's my retreat and what I really love. And I love the challenge.
So that makes me think of something, because you're absolutely right. We've seen over the years a lot of amazing athletes sign up, and quite often they're the ones who blow up within the first couple of stages. You know, they've had huge success as triathletes. You know, they're Ironman. They tend to, you know, go out too fast, or maybe they're good ultra runners, but they've not been used to pacing themselves over 7 days and dealing with all the logistics of carrying all your food that you need for the week. And as you said, planning is probably 50% of the battle. So what would you say to those people out there who are thinking they've never done a self-supported stage race before, and they're very curious about it? They're really thinking, gosh, I think I could probably do this. But you know, they're probably, I'm sure, and you've probably talked to a few of them as your students, they're probably nervous about signing up because they're saying, gosh, I just don't know if I'm capable of this. But maybe you've got some insight to say, look, maybe you're actually, there's a higher chance of you being able to do well at this than maybe in a sort of 1 day 50 or 100-mile race.
Yeah, so I would say to them, probably one of the most important things is to start developing as an ultra runner and make peace with being slow. So, you know, as I mentioned, I used to be a road marathoner, and I was very performance and speed oriented. And in my prime, like my marathon goal pace was in the low 7 minutes. So I was speedy. When I started doing trail marathons and trail ultras, my pace became progressively slower. And so a trail marathon on a rugged course, you know, it's only 26 miles, but it may take me 5 to 6 hours instead of close to 3 hours because of the rugged terrain and the elevation profile and all the other factors. And so mentally, I had to make peace with that slow tortoise pace. That's even more important with the Grand to Grand. You know, I live now in Colorado in the high altitude mountains where so-called running has a great deal of hiking mixed in. And so I have to make peace and be prepared for a pace that may be as slow as only, you know, an average pace of only 4 miles an hour, which is a 15-minute mile, which means I'm hiking a lot. And to go from being a road marathoner running twice as fast as that to suddenly be this rugged trekker, alternately hiking and slowly jogging in the mountains, that is a real adjustment. And so you have to prepare mentally to just be on your feet that much longer and be that much slower. And that involves cultivating patience and reducing your stress level and just being really having a relaxed, patient mindset. And so that's why I think the elite speedy runners and triathletes get into trouble at something like the Grand to Grand, because all of a sudden they're out in the desert, they're carrying 18 pounds, they're slogging through sand or up some rocky cliff, and they look at their watch and they say, oh my God, it took me 30 minutes to go 1 mile, and they freak out. But it's like, if you're managing heat and you're going up a Vermilion cliff and you've got 18 pounds or 20 pounds in your pack, then a half-hour mile isn't that bad. You just have to be like patient and prepared for that reality. And so that's a long way of saying, like, you have to prepare for that kind of slow endurance.
So let me jump in there. So what is it about the mentality of a triathlete who's used to running over a few hours, or a marathon runner? Why is it they don't get it right? I mean, they've signed up for this months in advance. They've prepared for it. They've got all the advice, and yet what happens? What stops them from thinking correctly?
Oh, I think there's so many things that can go wrong. I mean, one is the stress of, you know, suddenly you get to Kanab and it's hot temperatures and you're in a new climate and you're adjusting to that, and you're in an unfamiliar wide open space with, you know, sandy terrain, or I mean, sometimes it rains. You can't be a control freak. You have to like let go, expect the unexpected, and realize, like, when you embark on the G2G, you can't control the variables. You just have to make the best of the circumstances wherever you are in that given mile. Mm-hmm. And I think athletes who are very performance oriented, and who are, you know, rigid and are regimented about their training, that can be a real challenge, that loss of control. And so I think that's one factor.
Okay. Well, talking about expectations, what, if anything, was your experience at GTG compared to your expectations? Because you mentioned your editor asked you to do this, maybe hoping from a Jeopardy perspective you were going to fail, and he was going to have a great article to write about you lying in the dust in the middle of the desert with a a condor looking over you. But what were your actual experiences at the end compared to your expectations?
So one of the things that was so wonderful about 2012 is I truly had a beginner's mindset with hardly any expectations. And I think that's really healthy to go into something instead of saying like, oh, I want to be in the top 10. It's just, I wanted to survive. And I was just like, I felt like I was entering an episode of Survivor, the TV show. And sometimes it did feel like that. So as long as I was surviving, I was like grateful. So I didn't care about how I placed, and I didn't even get competitive until the long stage midway through the week. I'm like, wow, I'm kind of rocking it. And I caught up to the lead woman, and that was a really dramatic time. But so I didn't have any expectations other than like, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is so cool. I'm just going to soak it up. And I had the expectation that crazy shit, for lack of a better word, like crazy stuff would happen, and I would just have to adapt. And that kind of adaptability and flexibility is really important to get through the week. And I'll give you just one example. This was back in 2012 before I started using a hydration reservoir. So I was still running, I was running with handheld water bottles, which is so crazy. I would, now I have a reservoir and soft flasks. But that first year, I used to use handheld water bottles, which seemed fine and normal. So on day 2, when we were like ascending this from high desert up to the Kaibab National Forest, and I was just, going through all this spiky desert vegetation, I tripped and had a really bad fall. I just fell, I did a face plant, but I landed on my hands, which were holding my water bottles. And a big spiky plant punctured my water bottle. And I thought, oh my God, my race is done. Like, how can I survive in the desert without water? And thankfully, I had thought to pack some duct tape. So, I'm like, I can handle this. I can adapt. And I taped up the hole on my water bottle. And the rest of the week, I carried my water bottle upside down so the leaking hole was on the top. And I just made it work. And so things like that come up, and you have to be self-reliant and figure a way out. And I did, and that felt really empowering. But you have to, like I said, expect the unexpected and just figure out how to make it work.
Well, that's a really good example of having to adapt and potentially dealing with a crisis, which, as you said, could have finished your race, but you found a way to overcome it, and you became a better person as a result of it. And that's one of the things we like to think about with GTG. We really want to empower people so they're really getting back to nature, and they don't have technology happening. They don't have iPhones with them that they can use as a crutch if they feel they're going to get lost. We really want people to feel, as you said earlier in our discussion, that it is kind of about surviving, about making it to the finish line, because typically maybe only 10-15% of our competitors have actually got a realistic chance of getting onto the podium. For 80% of our runners, it's all about, are they going to be able to finish it? And that's really important. And I just wondered if you've got any comments to make about what your experience is and how you feel about being able to deal with all sorts of stuff in the desert on your own effectively. I mean, we provide you a place to sleep in a camp overnight. We give you water, but other than that, you're pretty much on your own. So what have you got to say about that?
Well, let me back up to what you said about the 80% who are just out there to finish. Someone came to mind when you were saying that, and that's a client I coached for the 2015 GTG, a wonderful woman named Jamie. And Jamie was not a super fast runner. She's a strong hiker, and she had some ultra running experience. But she went into the GTG really wondering if she could even make the cutoffs. And so I really had to change her mind frame. Instead of being anxious about it or feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to be one of the last, we tried to turn that around to be a point of pride. I said, Jamie, you have to understand that the participants toward the back of the pack, they actually have a harder job because they get to camp later, and so they have less time to recover for the next day. Like I would get to camp every day around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and then I'd have all afternoon to chill out, dry out my clothes, put my feet up, so I had more recovery time. The back of the pack was showing up at sunset or even at dark, and it was much harder for them. They had more time on their feet and less time to recover. So I told Jamie, I'm like, you need to look at this as a point of pride and understand what you're doing is actually harder, and you need to like embrace it as a point of pride and not be embarrassed or self-conscious about being toward the back, but just take it as it is and do the best you can and run your own race.
Mm-hmm.
And she just had the best attitude. And on day one was a terrible high heat day when many runners were vomiting from the heat and exhaustion. And she barely got through day one. And then she just mentally hit reset. And basically toward the week, she kept doing better and better. And so as other people were struggling and fading, she kept getting better and better. And she ended up finishing solidly mid-pack. And I was so proud of her. But that's an example of like just how important your mindset is, and being prepared to be out there so long,
Okay.
and just getting through it.
Well, maybe related to that, maybe thinking of Jamie as an example, but what would be your top 3 tips for people think, one of your students doing it for the first time? What would be your advice for them?
Well, I think number one, which I mentioned already, is to develop as an ultra runner, which can, of course, incorporate a lot of hiking. You don't have to run 50 miles. You can be a very accomplished hiker. But the point is that you need to spend several months. Like I would take at least a 6 to 9 month training block and build in 50Ks and 50 milers. Because if you look at, the Grand to Grand is, you've got 5 main stages and then the short final stage, but it's basically a marathon or 50K every day with one of the hardest 50 milers you could do in the middle of it. So you have to normalize and be comfortable with marathon to 50K distance, and then stretch yourself to be able to handle an extremely challenging 50 miler. So I think, having months of training where you build in a 50 mile or 100K race so that you experience what it's like to move steadily on your feet for over half the day, and to experience the problems, whether it's foot problems or digestive problems, all the things that can come up. You need experience on how to hopefully prevent or troubleshoot those problems. And it's really hard to simulate that in training. Like if your idea of a long run is only 3 to 4 hours for a road marathon, that's not going to cut it. You need to have some serious long ultras under your belt. You also need to just adapt to spending a lot of time on your feet. So by that, I mean, when I was peak training for Grand to Grand, I would just be on my feet as much as I could. I would literally run errands. So instead of driving to town, I would put a backpack on my back, walk or jog to town, do errands, and come home with stuff on my back. So being creative like that about your training. Then my second tip would be what we also talked about preparing logistically. And so that means like doing your homework to read and learn, really become a student of studying how self-supported stage races work, and then figure out your gear and food. I mean, that's key. You want to understand how to fuel and how to pack the food. This is not this is very different than an ultra marathon, in that let's say you sign up for a 50-mile ultra marathon. They have wonderful aid stations with all kinds of sugary snacks every 6 to 8 miles, and you can eat as much as you want. Well, that's not the case at the Grand to Grand. You have to be highly efficient with your fuel. And that's a whole other conversation we could have about how to properly fuel for something like this. But there's a lot of good information out there, and you just have to test things out. And then I guess the other main tip is it gets back to the mental preparation. You have to stoke your desire, and you will have every reason in the world to quit during the Grand to Grand. You'll really, a lot, you have to have a desire to finish that will work through those inevitable, really, really tough times.
Okay. Well, I think that you've touched on the nutrition, which, as you said, it's a whole, I think, subject that you could spend just a podcast talking about nutrition. But that's something we notice is a huge factor on a lot of the people who DNF. We have about 20% of our people at the start line who DNF, and invariably it's because they get their nutrition wrong. They're not able to eat the food they brought with them. They're not able to keep it down, and a lot of it is to do with because they brought the wrong stuff. They've never practiced with it in advance, or practiced with it with their body in a stressful situation, etc. So let's not get onto it here. I was going to ask you a bit more about what the Sarah Lavender Smith special recipe is, but we'll leave that for another podcast.
I can talk a little. Well,
okay, give us 1 minute.
A little bit about that.
Yeah, give us your 1 minute version.
Okay, so basically, well, I was going to tell you what happened in 2019, which is pretty hilarious in hindsight. Which was I tried to be as efficient as I could by 2019, my third time doing this, because then by 2019, I was like, okay, I wanted to do my best ever. I was turning 50 that year. It was my 50th birthday present to myself. And I was like, I want to kick ass, do the best I can. And so I became as highly efficient with fuel as I could, so that I could carry as little as possible. And so part of getting your fuel right is getting as fit as you can, because a lot of the people who struggle at the G2G, they struggle because they're not as fit or is really as in shape as they could be going into the G2G. And so they need more calories, or, as you mentioned, they haven't practiced with the right food. But I got in as top shape as I could. And I also practiced with, having basically eating much more efficiently and more like a long haul backpacker rather than an ultra marathoner. And by that, I mean, when I'm racing an ultra, I'm just downing calories. Like I'm trying to get, 200 calories an hour at least, a lot of simple sugar gels. I'm eating at aid stations. You can't do that at the G2G. And so I had to be much more reliant on just like high density backpacker food at fewer intervals during the day. And I had to, rely more on my own body fat to burn, rather than having this constant stream of sugar, because I couldn't carry so many sugary snacks. And long story short, I got to the start line of the G2G with as efficient a fuel source as I could. And I had the minimum, I had slightly more than the minimum required, because for safety reasons, the G2G makes you carry a certain minimum of calories so that people don't starve and people aren't unsafe. So I had that minimum. My problem was During the long stage, I kind of ate ahead of my stores. And on day 5, so the penultimate stage, I got my food storage checked. And lo and behold, I was a little light. And I got penalized by a full hour. And this was devastating. I was in the lead. I was the only woman in the top 10. And suddenly Garth, the rules commissioner, gave me an hour penalty because I wasn't carrying enough calories. And I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I don't have enough food, and to have enough food at the end of the following stage, I could barely eat the next morning. So I had to run the last stage of 26 miles or so on hardly any calories in order to have enough food for the by the end as required. And I was just worried I was going to pass out. And the point is your body can do more than you think it can. I did, as long as I had the hydration and electrolytes, which I did it. I ran really well that stage, and it was just an amazing lesson in what your body can do. And even though I was basically bonking the entire time. And so don't cut your food sources as lightly as I did. Take adequate storage, even if it means carrying a couple extra pounds. But just know, if you get in trouble, or if you're like out in the desert and you haven't been able to ingest calories, like, you actually can. As long as you have hydration and electrolytes, you can suffer through the bonk. You really can keep going.
Do you recall how much weight you lost that week?
I actually didn't lose that much because I had a lot of water retention and from inflammation, and it was surprisingly not that significant. It was more like the week after the inflammation went down, I was on the thin side, but I eat like a horse, so I gained it right back.
So tell me, that was interesting about the penalty there. And Garth Reader, our race commissioner, he's employed to be strict and make sure the rules are enforced, because it just makes it fair for everyone. But do you have any other stories about GTG that you'd like to share with us? Any interesting sides?
I have so many. Of course I do. You don't want me to scare your participants off, do you? I'll tell you about probably the one adventure that sticks out from my inaugural year. Is you'll see a lot of snakes along the desert, and I used to be scared of snakes, and I'm not. After the GTG, it's like the GTG kind of normalized them, and you realize snakes won't bother you if you don't bother them, and they're just out in the sun doing their thing. But the first year in 2012, when we were on the long stage approaching the sand dunes, and I was doing well. And you start to, in the dark, you might start seeing things. And I was all by myself. That's the thing, you're in the middle of nowhere because the field gets so spread out. You might buddy up with another runner, but often you're really out there by yourself. And I was approaching the sand dunes, and I saw what looked like a headlamp with a dying beam. I thought, oh my God, a runner dropped their headlamp. I have to go get their headlamp and retrieve it. And so I go over to what I think is this headlamp, and I bend down to reach at it, and I realize it is a coiled snake with a big triangular head, and the light coming from it was the reflection of my headlamp and the snake's eyes. So I shrieked and jumped backward. And I can tell you, I've never experienced such a jolt of adrenaline. And I ran through the sand, and I was so pumped with adrenaline from that encounter. I caught up with the lead woman midway through, and then the race was on. And so that was really exciting. Nothing bad came out of it. The only bad thing was every stick in the trail I saw from then on, I thought was a snake. But that just goes to show, where else would something like that happen, you know?
Yeah, no, that's a great example, because we've had over 1,000 people do it, and not everyone's lucky enough like you to have a close encounter with a rattlesnake. But the great thing about rattlesnakes is, they're more scared of you than you of the, and
Yeah.
they rattle. So they rattle for a purpose. They're saying, "Look, don't come near me," and they usually slither
Yep.
away. So they don't want to come near you. So that's a really good example.
Yeah, and I would just say the other stories all have to do with just the fun of the special relationships we develop with our tent mates. It becomes very tribal, like you bond with the other 7 smelly people in your tent, and you take care of each other. And I love that experience. It's the GTG, during the day, as I said, you're so by yourself and off the grid and immersed in the wilderness, but then you get to camp and it's very social, and because we're all unplugged and we don't, I didn't use my phone for a week, which was amazing because there's no way to charge it, and I didn't have my laptop, and so you rekindle the art of conversation and you just sit around and talk. And that's one of the most valuable things to experience.
And finally, maybe I was thinking here about, maybe it applies to you, but certainly other people we've talked to. Did GTG, in any of the ones that you did, inspire you to then go on and do something special? Because it is empowering. We've had examples of people going off and popping the question to get married or whatever. Has anything like that happened to you as a result of you doing
I mean,
it?
I just, the belief, like I believe that I can get through tough things. And that's a really confidence boosting thing. And so, for example, the year after my last GTG in 2020, during the pandemic, all the races got canceled. And then this one race organizer put on a virtual event, which was all about vertical gain. And so we use our smart devices to measure our elevation during the week. And I looked at the different levels of, like, and the top level was a double Everest. And so it was like 58,000 feet of gain during the week. I'm like, why not? Let's just see. It's like with the GTG, I'll just take, it's like trying to get your mind around, how can I climb 2 Everests in a week? And it's similar to the GTG. You can't think of the whole thing. You take it day by day. It's like, look, when you get to the sand dunes at sunset or nighttime of stage 3, you got to tell yourself, like, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. Like, you can't look at all the insane sand dunes you have to get over. You just do it one at a time. And so that week in May of 2020, I did a 180-mile week, and I did over 58,000 feet of vertical gain. And I don't think I would have, I'm just an ordinary person, but having done the GTG, I'm like, well, if I, who says I can't? So I did it.
Well, Sarah, this has been a really interesting conversation. But before I finish here, you showed me a book earlier that
yes,
that you wrote, and I'd love you to have a little plug now.
Thank you. This is this is a book I published a few years ago. It's called The Trail Runner's Companion, a step-by-step guide to trail running and racing from 5Ks to ultras. It's available online on Amazon. So it distills all my coaching knowledge, and it has a whole section in there. It has some great photos from the GTG, and it talks about the mental game, and how to develop as an ultra runner and then mentally prepare. And then, like, I have to show you my favorite thing. If I can lift it up, it's very heavy. It's this is the coolest trophy I've ever won. I love these sandstone trophies from the Grand de Grand. So thank you, Colin and Tess. This is like my lifetime achievement award. my 50th birthday present to myself. So I
Well,
always will treasure it.
congratulations again. I remember giving that to you back in 2019. So I look forward to giving another trophy to you in the not too distant future, Sarah.
Well, I hope I can go back. I mean, I have a lot on my calendar, but I'm so grateful that this event came into my life and to be able to do it these multiple times. And yeah, it's a very, very special week out of my life.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today. And I'm excited to get this podcast published and up there on the internet. And so just signing off, this is Colin Geddes, event director from the GTG, who today has been speaking with alumni and past champion Sarah Lavender Smith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. Take care.
Take care.